Welcome to Xhibition, an Xbox podcast, episode number 36. My name is Samuel Adams, and this is a weekly show dedicated entirely to the world of Xbox to bring you everything you need to know. And this week, a very big week because we had some sales figures shared that show just how fast Xboxes are flying off the shelves, with a couple of comments here and there from Phil Spencer himself. But on top of that, we saw a lot of big rumors and announcements for first-party exclusives coming to Xbox and some very big third-party games as well. And we'll be diving into all of those, including Crysis 4 and a new project supposedly coming from certain Affinity. But additionally, we'll also be talking about games with gold and really bringing up the question of should this service continue and where does Xbox Live Gold fit into this new 2022 Xbox that we have on our hands. But without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into it. To kick off today's show, Xbox has posted record annual revenue once again, beating out last year's figures by 17.07% to bring in about $16.28 billion in revenue. That is a lot of cash, and it just goes to show that Xbox Series X and S are continuing to sell big for the company, and that's pretty evident for anybody who is on the hunt right now for an Xbox Series X in particular. Now, the Xbox Series S is much more available. You can pretty much walk into a Target or a Best Buy, at least that's what's been the case for me, and pick one up when you need one. But for the Xbox Series X, it has pretty much the same scarcity as the PlayStation 5, and that's just me speaking from personal experience, checking stocks, and just kind of following along with the situation. But in short, Daniel Ahmad has the full rundown of the biggest stats. Of course, this is a very prominent gaming industry analyst over on Twitter who writes, quote, Microsoft's gaming division, Xbox, reported revenue of $16.28 billion for the 2021 calendar year. It's the best calendar year on record, beating a previous high of 2020. Total gaming revenue was up 17.7% year over year. Content and services continue up 8.8% year over year, and hardware revenue is up 63.3% year over year. And of course, Phil Spencer had a lot to say about the availability of these consoles, saying that both Xbox and PlayStations are hard to come by right now because demand is so high. Supply is still just as big as it's ever been, but when it comes to the demand, the COVID-19 pandemic has kept so many people at home that additional revenue that might be spent going out to bars or going out to parties or going out to movies, that is now being funneled into gaming. And I can speak to that myself. Of course, I played a lot of games before the pandemic, but now I've invested more in better headphones, better peripherals, because I spend more time at home enjoying these services and these games that I can kind of throw myself into. What's interesting to me about this specific report is that hardware revenue is up 63.3% year over year. And of course, more and more people are jumping on to the next generation of consoles, the Series X, the Series S. But on top of that, what makes this specific report unique is that Microsoft is trying so hard to move into the streaming space and get people away from hardware. That's the big draw for Xbox Game Pass for a lot of people, is that you do have the cloud gaming side of that. And so for me, this hardware revenue up 63.3% year over year, it signals that hardware continues to sell and that cloud gaming is by no means eating into this market in a significant way yet. The question is, how will the hardware sales adjust when Microsoft launches a subscription that features only the cloud gaming side of their service? Because that is coming, and we've talked a lot about television apps and potentially standalone hardware streaming sticks that you could plug into the back of any kind of regular average television and get that Xbox streaming experience with low latency, next generation loading times through this updated architecture, all of the bells and whistles you need for a fraction of the price. And my personal prediction is that hardware will continue to see this kind of return because I don't think that people are ready to get rid of their boxes yet. What is important, though, is on this graph that you see here on Daniel Ahmad's tweet, which shows the discrepancy between content and services and hardware. It is the services, it is the games you are playing that are generating revenue for the company. That is where the meat of their business lies. Hardware, of course, still very important. Having good hardware in particular, very important. But ultimately, it is Game Pass, and it's the games that are included on the service that are really carrying the company, and as it should be. That's pretty much how every gaming company works. Now, with that being said, first party sales and Game Pass carried. Third party sales actually declined for the year, according to the report from VGC that we looked at earlier. And so, with all of that being considered, it's clear Microsoft's strategy here, in my opinion, is working. Because content and services continue to increase, first party continues to be very strong, and you saw two of the biggest releases across gaming on the Xbox side of the fence for 2021, in the same way that PlayStation is putting out a lot of great content for 2022. But Halo Infinite and Forza Horizon 5 certainly drove up hardware sales and subscriptions, no doubt about it, and that had a big leverage in contributing to this year-over-year growth. So congrats to the team at Xbox, but there is plenty of growth on the way as well, because Microsoft, again, $70 billion acquisition of Activision Blizzard coming down the pipe. And on top of that, they continue to invest in internal teams and give them the time and the creative freedom they need to make new things, which brings us directly into our next story. A new report claims that certain Affinity is working on an Xbox exclusive Monster Hunter-like codenamed Suerte. This comes from Windows Central, which writes, quote, Microsoft is working on a veritable mountain of content with both internal and external partners. Microsoft acquired ZeniMax and is attempting to acquire Activision Blizzard, and its growing list of upcoming Xbox games is a big driving force for its subscription service, Xbox Game Pass. However, in addition to internal games, Microsoft is working on a range of third parties on titles like Project Dragon from IO Interactive, As Dusk Falls from Interior Night, and Contraband from Avalanche. Thanks to the latest episode of Jeff Grubb's Grub Snack Show, we now have unearthed yet another game. I can confirm, Windows Central writes, via our own separate sources, that this game is indeed real and is currently codenamed Project Suerte. Suerte is reportedly a Monster Hunter-inspired game, implying big monster battles with multiplayer gameplay. The game is in development by Certain Affinity, which is known primarily as a support studio on titles like Halo and Call of Duty. According to the information I've received over the last few months, the reporter writes, Project Suerte has been in development since the summer of 2020 and is likely slated for a 2023 reveal and a 2024 release, although it may come a bit sooner or later depending on the dynamism and variables that often come with game development. Certain Affinity has long been a close partner of Microsoft, working on various Halo titles from Halo 2 through to the Master Chief Collection to Halo Infinite. I've received some separate hints that Certain Affinity may also be working on a new game mode for Halo Infinite, which could be a take on the popular Battle Royale formula or something completely different entirely. What's interesting here is that Microsoft continues to give studios creative freedom, and I think that is something that you'll see with Activision Blizzard in the coming years after that deal closes. But having a variety of games on Game Pass is something that I think is going to bring and continue to bring more value to the service. And I think about this in particular from the perspective of the assumption that anyone playing on Game Pass, or I should say anyone playing on Xbox, will eventually have some kind of Game Pass subscription. Now, you'll always have people that hold out, and you'll always have people that want to buy individual games, and that will still be an option. But when you look at games like Back 4 Blood, for instance, being able to have a game that comes to Game Pass and everybody is able to jump on and play because they already have it in their library, that's a unique situation that players and companies have never really had before, where it is assumed you have access to this. The same could be said for Rainbow Six Extraction. That game dropped, and you can just dive in if you have an Xbox and play with a squad of people, and it doesn't matter if they have a strong interest in the game or not, or if they are willing to spend $60 on it. Being able to have access to it means you're more likely to jump in and play it, which bumps up those player numbers, and you could have some players fall in love with a game they might not have tried otherwise just because it wasn't on their radar and it wasn't really in their price range. And I think that when you look at a Monster Hunter-like game, that taps into the interest of a different audience outside of the world of FPSs that is able to say, hey, did you see that cool new game? Let's go check that out. We'll dive in on Game Pass on day one. And I think that's kind of the route that you're going to be seeing Xbox take. Not that every game will be collaborative. Of course, you have things like Avowed that are first-party games that are going to be these single-player narrative-driven adventures. But I think you will see games and experiences like this sprinkled in where it can be a single-player game, but being able to squad up with people that might also have Game Pass. That's really where the value proposition lies. And I personally think that adds a ton of value to what Game Pass is really offering. And when you think about anyone who might be trying to save as much money as possible, trying to game on a budget, if you had a friend that said, "Hey, this new Monster Hunter like game is coming out. Did you know you can get it for 15 bucks a month if you just subscribe to Game Pass Ultimate? You can play it anywhere, Xbox One, Series X, Series S, PC, on the cloud, whatever you want to do." That, even if you bought it for 2 months, super affordable. And if you haven't had it before, you have the free trial. I think it's just a great way to get people into the service and to really give people games to play. And I think that's really what it comes down to. So excited to see that Certain Affinity is working on some new projects. And on top of that, it's nice to see that they're just breaking out of being a support studio. I think that's always going to be awesome to see. If you're a fan of Star Wars, this week was a massive one for you because we got the confirmation of not one, not two, but 3 new games coming in the galaxy far, far away. This news comes from an official press release on the Electronic Arts website that writes upcoming titles include the next game in the Star Wars Jedi franchise, a new Star Wars FPS from Peter Hirschman, and a strategy game via a publishing collaboration between Respawn and Bit Reactor. This is going to be a fantastic trio of games. And I look back to Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, and I see the beauty that that game delivered and how it fleshed out this kind of semi-open world Star Wars adventure with an entirely new cast of characters, of course, some returning favorites, but in short, you have a unique experience that tells a new story. And I think that's what excites me the most as Star Wars continues to get fleshed out, both in movies and television and in the world of gaming. Now, in terms of the teams working on these projects, Respawn is absolutely going to be able to take this across all 3 games to the next level because the FPS, from what I have heard, is not Battlefront 3. Something entirely new. Could it be a Mandalorian game? Potentially. Who knows? Could it be a Boba Fett game? Maybe. We saw some leaked footage of a Star Wars game come out this week that was canceled, of course, but it started to get the balls turning a little bit and the wheels turning as to what this actually could become. On top of that, of course, the sequel to Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, that has been rumored for a 2022 release for a few weeks at this point. And I think that they are waiting to announce that wisely. It could be an E3 season style announcement, or it could be something that they're waiting until it's ready. From my perspective, a 6-month window between the announcement of something and the launch of something sets the expectations and it gives developers time to confirm when they're ready to release it. And I think that's super important. But on top of that, you have a Star Wars strategy game coming from former XCOM devs at Bitdefender, which is a newly formed studio. That sounds awesome. And so, again, much like what Microsoft is doing when it comes to this new Monster Hunter game and getting out of the FPS third-person shooter kind of trope that we've seen over the years with Halo and Gears of War, Star Wars is branching out from just Battlefront. Of course, you still have an FPS experience, but you get these action games, you get a strategy game, and to be able to see this kind of evolution and this variety, I think it's fantastic. So keep your eyes on Respawn because they are working very diligently on bringing some awesome, diverse Star Wars experiences to a galaxy near you. Now, no release dates have been shared. I want to reiterate that this could be 2022, 2023, 2024, even beyond that. But that's pretty much what you can expect in the world of Star Wars from the Electronic Arts partnership that is going on with Lucasfilm Games. It is incredibly important to note that Star Wars was not the only IP that got a big announcement this week. A new Crysis is on the way. The official Crysis Twitter account confirmed the news, saying, quote, "We are excited to announce the 4th installment in the Crysis series is in development. We have a long road ahead of us, but we want heroes to join us today to shape the next chapter in the Crysis franchise." You can watch the teaser and read the blog for more info. And the teaser itself is kind of just a reiteration of the nanosuit technology that so many people have come to know and love and associate with Crysis. You see some iconic imagery here, but it doesn't really show anything other than some really good looking CG, which of course is something that Crysis is known for, not necessarily CG, but really, really fantastic graphics. And so the official article is as follows. Next Crysis game confirmed. To everyone in our amazing Crysis community and to all fans of the franchise all around the world, we have a special announcement to make just for you. It's something you have been asking us for a long time, so it's now finally time to confirm. Yes, a new Crysis game is happening. We are so pleased and excited to bring this news to you, and we really can't wait to reveal more details about what lies ahead. Right now, the game is in the early stages of development, so it will be a while yet, but we wanted to bring you the news at this time as we are so hyped for the future and to let you know that we will be listening to our community. Crytek has a proud history of working with our community to develop the games you want to play. Crysis is incredibly important to so many people. It's beloved by gamers everywhere, and some of those working in the industry today are doing so because of the original game. So we want to make sure that the next installment in the franchise lives up to all of your expectations. Make sure to join our socials and get involved. On top of that, they also go on to talk more about how this is an important step in the process because they're hiring to help make this game a reality. So if that says anything about where they are in the development process, you can make assumptions from there. If I had to guess, this is going to be a 2024 game. My biggest question is, if you are in the blog post explaining that it's going to be a while, why not just, you know, work on it and then let us know when the product is almost done? That's just my take. It's my hot perspective on that one. But I still am excited about this. Crysis, of course, is a unique game because while it still holds up well today, for the longest time, roughly 10 years, I would say, from my perspective, maybe even more than that now, Crysis was the benchmark for PC gaming. Can it run Crysis? We talked about this, from consoles perspectives with Crysis 2 on the Xbox 360 is what I remember comparing to PC builds of the game and seeing just how beautiful that game could become. But Crysis for a long time was the benchmark in terms of visual fidelity in gaming. And with Crysis 4, I think that it has an incredibly high bar set for it because people still want those beautiful graphics. People still want that groundbreaking experience of having something that is just beyond anything that could have been comprehended before. I mean, that's the kind of ground that Crysis and Crysis 2 were really breaking back in the day. And so to be able to see Crysis 4 come out, it's exciting for me, but on top of that, I want this to be a game that fully takes advantage of what the next generation hardware has to offer, and you really wring that rag dry. Because you do have the Crysis trilogy, the remastered 3 games that was released, I believe, last year or the year before, but no matter how you cut it, that was a last generation game. They got a couple of bells and whistles for the next generation, but it wasn't built with this new technology in mind. It was built to work with this new technology, but I want something that is designed from the ground up to milk this new system for all it's worth. And so that's what I'm hoping from the next Crysis game. And it's worth noting here in the description of the game itself, Crysis 4 working title could be something entirely new. And in my opinion, Crysis is 1, 2, and 3, Crises, however you want to say it. Those represent a specific section of this franchise. I would love to see this kind of be a rebirth in a way, in the same way that Halo Infinite was not Halo 6. I think it's important to put out games that feel welcoming just at a glance. You can get the next generation invested here because if you continue to put out games and you eventually have stuff like Far Cry 6, yeah, that's great, but ultimately, do I have to play the other supposedly 5 games, in reality more than that, to fully understand what's happening? The answer is no, but it can be a turnoff if you don't understand how Far Cry works and you're just wandering through Walmart trying to find something to play. And so with all of this in mind, still very excited for Crysis, but again, I would not expect this to happen anytime before 2024. We could hear more this year, but if I had to bet, probably won't be hearing too much. They should probably just go radio silent and keep working on that really beautiful game, which is what I assume it will be. And so we continue with more rumors about a potential Halo Master Chief Collection treatment for another classic Xbox franchise. The big question at this point is which one? This news started floating around a lot this week, and it originated from the Xbox Era podcast, where the host did not name the series in question, but they said that rumors are that a collection is going to be in the works. So the question is, again, which will it be? Gears of War, Fable, something from Bethesda's catalog potentially, as reported on here by Pure Xbox? Ultimately, the question remains, and it will not be answered until we get some kind of announcement, but this feels like something that could be cannon fodder in a way for the Xbox lineup. And when you look back at the way the Master Chief Collection has seen this redemption arc, From my perspective, the Master Chief Collection supported the 2020 launch of the Xbox Series X and S in a fantastic way because it did improve the original Halo games and it gave people something to connect to when they booted up that console. You could dive into Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, any of these big games that launched with the console and that took advantage of the Xbox Series X and S hardware. But at the same time, you could also dive back into these classic experiences. And that's the same on the Xbox Series X and the S and the Xbox One and every iteration of that. But what it does is it captures the classics and it preserves them. And it packages them up in this very nice little box for everybody to enjoy, no matter if they played them back in the day and want to jump back in, or if they're just browsing Game Pass and want to experience Halo for the first time, for instance. Having these remastered collections, it keeps these games fresh for people rather than having them just age and fade into the catalog. And so I think that the most likely answer here is that the Gears of War series would get this treatment. Because when I think about Xbox, again, it's always directly connected to Halo, but Gears of War is sitting right there waiting. It is the second to Halo for a lot of players. And so while the Ultimate Edition of Gears of War has helped modernize that original experience, Gears of War 2, Gears of War 3, Gears of War Judgment, those are all still abandoned on the Xbox 360. I think Judgment actually came out on the Xbox One, but Gears of War 2 and 3, those are still abandoned on the Xbox 360. And I use the word abandoned loosely because they are backwards compatible, but it would be nice to see them improved and to get all the extra functionality that comes with these modern releases. And thankfully, the Xbox has a lot of features that help improve the experience, auto HDR, FPS boost, that kind of thing. But a full remaster can just take that to the next level. I think about the visual fidelity of Gears Hive Busters. That is some of the most gorgeous gameplay I've experienced to date on the Xbox Series X. If you have not played Gears 5 Hive Busters, fantastic standalone expansion that I highly recommend you play. Great story as well. A little bit of a short romp, totally worth your time though. But to be able to have the full crescendo of this series is very important, I think, especially as you look to the future of what's going to happen with Gears 6. Will it reset the franchise? Because once again, those numbers are getting a little bit high. We need to recenter, and I think that focusing on the story of Kate Diaz in Gears 5 was a really good way to make that happen. And you saw the same kind of thing happen with Judgment, where you take the focus off of Marcus Phoenix and you start to make something fresh and new. And so I think that a Gears of War collection, whatever they want to end up calling it, could be a great way to get people into the franchise, but also to modernize those legacy games and keep them around for many years to come. And when a game begins to age, the multiplayer count begins to fall down. You see it all the way through Battlefield 2042, where that player count tanked because the game is not complete even today. But even with games like Halo the Master Chief Collection now that Halo Infinite is out, that player count will definitely take a hit now that there is a new Halo game on the block that is not Halo 5 Guardians. And so these remastered collections, in the same way that although the servers are shut down now, Halo 2's player count was very low. The player count for Halo the Master Chief Collection, very high. And so you can start kind of getting those maps back into the rotation and keep that game alive and keep the legacy that it leaves alive without relying on the original software. And so with Gears, there are so many multiplayer experiences that I never got to have. I never had that experience because I started playing Gears after 1, 2, 3, all of those had come and gone. To be able to recapture those maps and to be able to bring back those experiences for the players that had them back in the day, I think that's really the value that it brings. But I could equally see it going to a Fable or any of these other new franchises that Xbox has been able to acquire over the years. Anything is fair game, but Gears of War certainly sounds like the direct answer to this question. Hopefully we will see more during their conference around the E3 season. Speaking of Halo, as it turns out, Microsoft got a whole lot of people to play Halo and Forza, according to this article over at The Verge from Mitchell Clark. And of course, this news broke earlier this week, along with the earnings, that Forza Horizon 5 has crossed 18 million players and Halo Infinite has crossed 20 million players. Those are phenomenal numbers, and you can see the official tweet here from the Halo Twitter account, which reads, quote, "With over 20 million Spartans joining us so far, we are thrilled to announce that Halo Infinite is the biggest launch in Halo franchise history. Thank you everyone for joining us on the next step in this great journey." So before we even dive into any kind of analysis, congrats to the team at 343 because there was a lot of talk, a lot of questioning. You know, you have a year-long delay and you have a multiplayer beta that is good but certainly not perfect. I think that the multiple betas and the inside test helped with the launch of the game, and it has now become one of my favorite first-person shooters personally. But what 343 did is they defied the odds. You know, you had Halo 4 and 5, with Halo 4 being pretty well received, Halo 5 not really getting all of that love. And you had, with Halo Infinite, what many players considered to be the make it or break it game. If Halo Infinite had not been good, and if it had repeated the mistakes of Halo 5, you would have certainly seen plenty of backlash. But now you see this kind of renewed hope for the Halo franchise. You see this renewed love for Chief and Cortana. And I think that what the narrative of Halo Infinite did in particular is that it reset the playing board. You no longer had to rely on the Promethean timeline from Halo 5 Guardians. Of course, that was ended in the comics, but ultimately you don't have to look to that anymore. And it kind of brings us back to a center where you have Zeta Halo, you have Chief, you have Cortana, you have everything you need to get back into the fight. I loved it, but that's all beside the point. 20 million players, huge number. And Forza Horizon 5, also 18 million players, very respectable there. More than I personally expected, I think. And I don't want to undermine the work that has been done on that, but for it to only be 2 million shy of Halo Infinite is certainly nothing to shake a stick at. And it's one that I've been jumping back into over the course of the past few days. I've been feeling like diving into a racing game. So I've been doing all of the various challenges and all of these weeklies and stuff that you have to do on top of these big showcase events. But 2021 was a great year for Xbox. We talked about the sales numbers, and the games are certainly there to back those sales numbers up. It was just a great year all around. But if you want to read the full report from the team at The Verge, you certainly can. Definitely looking good for Team Xbox, though. And these investments that they're making and, you know, delivering good games, absolutely paying off. Finally, to round out today's show, we have Games with Gold for February of 2022. And I made a YouTube short on this a bit earlier in the week. It's time to wind down Games with Gold. It's time to call it quits. And in general, it's time to merge Xbox Live Gold into Game Pass. And this is something they were kind of hinting at last year whenever the pricing model changed for Xbox Live Gold, and it was going to be upped even more than it is now. And everybody started to ask why, what additional value are you providing? And it seemed to be kind of this underhanded push to get people into Game Pass to make it seem like the obvious move, since you would have to be paying basically the same amount anyway. And of course, that was not well received at all, and they ended up reversing that decision just days, actually hours, after they initially made it. But Games with Gold continues to struggle along, and Xbox Live Gold continues to exist. Your Games with Gold are Broken Sword, Never Yield, Hydrophobia, and Band of Bugs. If you look at these games and you say, hey, I've never heard of these, yeah, that's what I said as well. But at the same time, I saw some people saying, hey, these are free with your subscription. Sounds like a good value proposition for me. And I get that perspective, but this is the weakest link in the Xbox ecosystem today. This is what people look to and say, why does this exist? And I'm just ranting at this point. But the reason these games are so bad, and I think that I've said this before on this show, is that the value that PlayStation Plus delivers for PlayStation, Xbox delivers in Xbox Game Pass, because so many of the big games that would be included in Games with Gold, there's not really a purpose in including them in Games with Gold because they're already in Game Pass. And you want to be able to add as many games as possible to Game Pass because that's your main value proposition. That's what you want people to actually come and buy and play on. And so Games with Gold, this is more of an obligation at this point, from my perspective, to include games here. And you see it kind of looped in with Game Pass Ultimate and the branding and Xbox Live Gold both, but it's really just an archaic relic of the mid-2000s, where in 2007, Xbox Live Gold made sense. But with Xbox Game Pass Ultimate now being $15 a month, Game Pass Console being $10 a month, it seems like the next big step is just to move into Game Pass being inclusive of this service. The question is, how does that work financially for Microsoft? Because I've seen reports of over 100 million players still subscribing to games with gold exclusively. Now, is that the correct number? You can correct me in the comment section down below, but these are just what I've heard. And so if that is the case, you're talking about 100 million players paying $10 a month, $60 a year, I believe, if I remember correctly, if you go the entire year. That's a lot of cash. And so it's important for Microsoft to make sure that makes financial sense. But this is just kind of an embarrassment every month. And you see the replies always littered with, why does this even exist? And I have had some good experiences on games with gold, but they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel, because even with backward compatibility, the majority of games that I would want to play are already on Game Pass, and you can't double dip there. You can't give away Game Pass games on games with gold. So Microsoft is in quite a bit of a pickle, but in terms of public perception, it's just not good. It's just not a good look. And so it's important that they move away from this. And this is, again, one of the weaker months in recent months, but still a very weak month as compared to PlayStation Plus, which is getting a Borderlands standalone expansion, UFC 4, some good stuff like that. And Hydrophobia just isn't doing it, although that might be the one that I check out of all four of these. But Band of Bugs, I mean, it's not even something I really want in my library at this point, let alone featured on my home screen. Just my 2 cents. Again, I suppose you could be thankful for the games that are given away for free, but still something that is worth talking about, because Xbox has to get this messaging right. And I think that, again, games with gold is the weakest part of that. But that rounds out this week's episode of Xhibition, an Xbox podcast. If you enjoyed the show and you're new here, hit that subscribe button on YouTube or on a podcast service of your choice, and let me know what you think about everything we talked about here today. In particular, though, hit me up and let me know what you think the next big franchise to get a remastered collection is going to be. Is it going to be Fable, Gears of War, or something else entirely? I would love to hear your thoughts on that one. But stay tuned. Plenty of new stuff coming throughout the week on youtube.com/jampacksam. Posting YouTube shorts pretty much every day when I can. But on top of that, the podcast is always here on Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, ready and waiting in your inbox on YouTube or on your podcast subscription feed. But until next time, you guys have a fantastic week and keep on playing.